Cliff Richard, the legendary British singer whose career has spanned decades, has always been a man of discretion and grace, but at 85, he's finally breaking his silence on one of the most intriguing stories in music history: his relationship with George Harrison of the Beatles. Fans have long speculated about their interactions, rumors, misunderstandings, and legendary tales circulating in books, interviews, and tabloids. Now, Cliff is ready to set the record straight. The world knows George Harrison as the quiet Beatle, the spiritual seeker, and the musical genius whose contributions helped define a generation. But behind the fame, there were tensions, complexities, and human emotions that rarely made headlines. Cliff Richard, as one of Britain's most iconic performers, crossed paths with Harrison many times, witnessing firsthand both his brilliance and his quirks. What he's about to reveal is more personal, candid, and revealing than anything previously published. For years, fans have wondered, were there clashes, mutual respect, rivalry, or camaraderie? Cliff's reflections promise to answer these questions, sharing not only the facts, but the nuances, the moments of misunderstanding, the surprises, and the unspoken truths that shape their interactions. This isn't just about nostalgia or gossip, it's about history, honesty, and a rare glimpse into the private world of two of Britain's music legends died at 85. Cliff Richard has nothing to gain and everything to share. His story promises revelations that could change how fans view the dynamic between him and George Harrison, providing insight into a side of both icons few have ever seen. The truth, at last, is coming to light. Cliff Richard's career has spanned more than 6 decades, making him one of the most enduring figures in British music history. With hits ranging from Living Doll to We Don't Talk Anymore, he has captivated generations of fans. Yet, despite his fame, Cliff has always maintained a certain discretion about his personal relationships within the music industry, including his interactions with members of the Beatles. At 85, he has finally chosen to speak candidly about George Harrison, shedding light on a story that has been clouded by speculation for decades. Richard and Harrison first crossed paths during the early 1960s, a time when the British music scene was exploding with new talent. Cliff was already a household name, while the Beatles were on the brink of international superstardom. Their encounters were professional at first, often occurring at awards shows, recording studios, and industry events. While some have suggested there was rivalry between the two, Cliff clarifies that their relationship was far more nuanced. George was a brilliant musician, and I had immense respect for him, he recalls. But like any two people in the same industry, there were moments of tension, nothing personal, just the pressures of fame and competition. One notable point of friction, Cliff admits, stemmed from misunderstandings over creative choices and public perception. Both men were highly principled about their music and the way they wanted to be presented to the world. At times, Harrison's experimental approach to music and spirituality clashed with Cliff's more traditional pop sensibilities. While these differences never escalated into outright hostility, they created a professional distance that fueled speculation among fans and journalists alike. People love to read drama into it, Cliff says with a chuckle, but most of it was simply to artists navigating the same industry in their own way. Despite the occasional tension, there were also moments of genuine admiration. Cliff often marveled at Harrison's technical skill on the guitar and his innovative songwriting. Behind the scenes, he witnessed Harrison's quiet generosity, whether in mentoring younger musicians or in private gestures of friendship that the public never saw. These moments, he emphasizes, are part of the story that has rarely been told. George had a way of being fiercely private yet incredibly thoughtful, Cliff explains. You only truly saw it if you spent time with him off stage. Cliff Richard also reflects on how public perception often distorted the reality of their relationship. Media narratives tended to oversimplify interactions, framing them as rivalry when, in truth, they were simply the natural dynamics of two artists pursuing excellence in the same era. At 85, Cliff is keen to correct the record, providing a nuanced view that acknowledges both the complexities and the respect that defined their interactions. As he recounts these memories, it becomes clear that the story of Cliff Richard and George Harrison is not one of conflict, but of mutual admiration filtered through the pressures of fame, creativity, and public expectation. Cliff's reflections offer fans a rare glimpse into a private world, revealing the subtleties, misunderstandings, and heartfelt respect that characterize their encounters. For decades, much of this has been left untold, but now, at 85, Cliff Richard is finally willing to share the truth. As Cliff Richard delved deeper into his memories of George Harrison, he began to appreciate the subtleties that defined their relationship. While fans and media often speculated about rivalry, Cliff insists that the reality was far more layered. Their interactions were a blend of respect, curiosity, and the occasional professional tension, a natural byproduct of two highly talented artists navigating the rapidly evolving music industry of the 1960s. Cliff recalls attending several industry events, where Harrison's quiet presence often contrasted sharply with the flamboyance of other stars. Harrison, the so-called quiet Beatle, was meticulous in his craft, often retreating into his own world to perfect a melody or refine a lyric. Cliff, by contrast, was the consummate showman, conscious of public perception and the pressures of sustaining a long-term career. These differences sometimes led to misunderstandings. A casual remark could be misread, a fleeting gesture misinterpreted, fueling gossip that neither man sought to propagate. One key moment, Cliff reveals, involved a music collaboration that was proposed but never fully materialized. While he cannot disclose every detail, he explains that the project faltered due to differing creative visions. George had a particular way he wanted things done, Cliff explains, and I had my own approach. It wasn't personal, it was about the music. But naturally, when two strong-minded artists try to collaborate, there are sparks. He emphasizes that the episode, often blown out of proportion in fan circles, was a learning experience that deepened his understanding of Harrison's artistic integrity and dedication. Despite these professional differences, admiration was constant. Cliff often watched Harrison push musical boundaries, experimenting with sounds, instruments, and arrangements that few others would dare to attempt. George was quietly revolutionary, Cliff reflects. He didn't need the spotlight to prove his genius. That was something I respected deeply. These moments of insight helped bridge the gaps that tension sometimes created, allowing Cliff to see beyond misunderstandings to the core of Harrison's character, a brilliant musician with a strong moral compass and unwavering dedication to his art. Another layer of complexity was the way fame shaped their interactions. Both men were under intense public scrutiny, and every gesture or remark could be dissected by fans and journalists. Misinterpretations were inevitable, and Cliff admits that much of the supposed conflict reported at the time was simply a misunderstanding fueled by media sensationalism. Behind the headlines, their encounters were respectful, professional, and often quietly supportive. Cliff also notes the human side of Harrison rarely captured by the press. He recalls private conversations where Harrison revealed humor, warmth, and humility, traits that contrasted with the public persona of the untouchable Beatle. These glimpses offered Cliff a fuller understanding of the man behind the icon, solidifying a mutual respect that persisted even in the absence of frequent contact. By reflecting on these experiences at 85, Cliff Richard is not only setting the record straight, but also honoring the complexity of their relationship. He emphasizes that history often simplifies stories into rivalries or scandals, when in reality, the truth is far richer, nuanced, and deeply human. The next chapter in their story, Cliff insists, is about transparency, honesty, and finally revealing the respect and admiration that existed beneath the surface of public speculation. Over the decades, Cliff Richard's perspective on George Harrison has matured, allowing him to reflect on their interactions with greater clarity. At the time of their first encounters, both men were navigating the whirlwind of fame, industry pressures, and artistic ambition. Misunderstandings were inevitable, but Cliff now recognizes that many of the perceived slights or tensions were nothing more than the natural friction between two talented, driven individuals. Cliff recalls moments on award nights and industry gatherings where he and Harrison would exchange polite conversation, often brief but meaningful, while some observers interpreted their demeanor as distant or even competitive. Cliff explains that their respect for each other's craft underpinned every interaction. "We didn't need to be best friends," he says. "Mutual respect was enough. And honestly, that's what mattered most." He reflects on the fact that, for both men, music came first. Personal feelings were secondary to artistic integrity. Another source of complexity was the constant media scrutiny that both artists faced. Headlines often exaggerated minor incidents, creating a false narrative of rivalry or animosity. Cliff notes that at the time, journalists were eager to pit stars against each other, turning casual remarks into conflicts for the sake of a story. "People wanted drama," Cliff says with a wry smile. "George and I, we weren't interested in drama. We were interested in music." Understanding this context helps explain why so much speculation about their relationship proved misleading. Beyond professional and public pressures, Cliff also highlights the human side of Harrison that few fans ever saw. He recalls Harrison's wit, his humility, and his thoughtful gestures behind the scenes. Moments like Harrison quietly encouraging younger musicians, sharing creative ideas, or offering private support were part of what made him memorable and deeply respected. Cliff reflects on these qualities with admiration, acknowledging that Harrison's genius was inseparable from his character. Cliff also addresses one of the most persistent myths, that there was deep-seated jealousy or rivalry between them. At 85, he firmly dispels this notion, clarifying that any tension was situational, temporary, and often exaggerated. "I never hated George," he says. "If anything, I admired him and still do. We had different styles, different approaches, but that's all it was." This revelation is significant, not only for fans who have long speculated about their relationship, but also for understanding the broader music scene of that era, where collaboration, competition, and mutual admiration often coexisted in complex ways. Finally, Cliff emphasizes that the truth about their relationship is far richer than headlines suggested. It's a story of two icons navigating fame, creating music, and learning from each other along the way. At 85, he wants to ensure that history remembers George Harrison not only for his musical brilliance, but also for the respect and integrity he showed to his peers, including Cliff Richard. Their story, Cliff notes, is one of admiration, professionalism, and shared dedication, a far cry from the myths of rivalry or conflict that have persisted for decades. As Cliff Richard reflects on his decades-long career, he recognizes that the story of his interactions with George Harrison is more than just a personal anecdote. It's a window into the music world of the 1960s and 1970s, a time of extraordinary talent, intense pressure, and rapidly changing cultural landscapes. At 85, Cliff finally feels ready to share the nuanced truth about their relationship, dispelling myths and honoring Harrison's legacy. Cliff emphasizes that their encounters were largely defined by mutual respect. While they had different styles, Harrison's introspective, experimental approach versus Cliff's polished pop sensibilities, they each understood and appreciated the other's artistry. This respect was subtle, often invisible to the public eye, but it was deeply felt. Cliff recalls backstage moments, quiet conversations at industry events, and gestures of kindness that revealed Harrison's character. George had this calm, gentle presence, Cliff says. He was thoughtful, humble, and brilliant in ways that weren't always obvious to the media. He also sheds light on the pressures that shaped their interactions. Both men faced intense scrutiny from fans and journalists, and every word, every glance, and every choice could be misinterpreted. Headlines often distorted reality, framing minor incidents as rivalry or animosity. Cliff admits that this media narrative created unnecessary tension, but he is quick to clarify that any friction was temporary and situational, never personal. "People love a story of conflict," he laughs, but the reality was far more respectful and professional. One of the most striking aspects of Cliff's revelation is the admiration he held for Harrison's musical innovation. George's mastery of the guitar, his songwriting genius, and his willingness to explore uncharted musical territory left a lasting impression on Cliff. Even when they were not collaborating directly, He observed Harrison's dedication to his craft and the quiet impact it had on the industry. These insights gave Cliff a deeper appreciation for Harrison's influence and the profound legacy he left behind. Cliff also reflects on the human side of their story, the unspoken moments that defined their connection. He remembers Harrison's humility, his private generosity, and his encouragement of fellow musicians. These actions, often unnoticed by fans, highlight the integrity and character that made Harrison not just a musical icon, but a respected peer. For Cliff, these memories are as important as any chart-topping hit or award-winning performance. In sharing these reflections at 85, Cliff Richard provides fans with a richer, more accurate picture of his relationship with George Harrison. It is a story of admiration, professionalism, and mutual respect, far removed from the myths of rivalry and conflict. He hopes that by setting the record straight, the public can appreciate not only Harrison's genius, but also the thoughtful, dignified way he interacted with his contemporaries. Ultimately, Cliff's account is a testament to the complexity of relationships within the music industry, and a reminder that the truth is often more nuanced than the headlines suggest. At 85, Cliff Richard is honoring the memory of George Harrison by telling the story as it really happened, a tale of respect, artistry, and the quiet bonds that exist between two remarkable musicians. Fans, finally, get to see the truth behind the legend, and it is a story of admiration, honesty, and the enduring legacy of both icons.